Right, so thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. The purpose of this webinar today is to provide some information to those following the Islamic faith and who would like to participate in the holy month of Ramadan. So this webinar will be recorded and will be shared on our social media platforms next week. And all those attending, you will not be visible, it will be anonymous. So you can ask your questions in the Q&A box underneath. And my colleague Debbie will be monitoring them and hosting the Q&A session part of this webinar. And so I'm pleased to say that we are joined by Professor Rahman today from UCLH in London. And Professor Rahman will be doing a presentation and answering all your questions during the Q&A session. So I will now pass it over to Professor Rahman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chanpreet. Good morning and Assalamu alaikum to everybody. Thanks for joining. So I'm going to run a PowerPoint presentation soon just to explain what I'm talking about. Why have I been asked? I suppose because I'm a professor of rheumatology at UCL and I work on lupus. I've done a lot of things with my friends at Lupus UK over the years. They're a wonderful charity. They provide so many resources and support research, and really many people, including me, have reason to be extremely grateful to Lupus UK. As far as I know, this is the first year they've run something like this for Ramadan. Is that right, Chanpreet? And I think it's a great idea. I guess maybe they asked me because I'm a Muslim and I fast for Ramadan, so that's probably why. So I'll do my best to answer any questions. And I'm just going to share my slides now. Can I share screen? Yeah, share. Oh, can you let me share screen, please? Does everybody see that? Can you see the slides, everyone? Yeah. Okay. So Ramadan and lupus then. So in my practice, I get three types of questions from people who are Muslims in Ramadan, not just people with lupus, all my patients. The first type of question is, I want to fast, doctor. With my illness, can I do it? Will it be bad for my health? Will I be more ill if I fast? Second type of question is, well, I'm not sure I should be fasting really, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if my particular condition gives me an exemption for fasting. Can you advise me? And the third type of question is, I am going to fast. I've made that decision already, but I'm all these medicines. What shall I do? Should I stop them? Should I take them during the nighttime? Does it matter if I do that? So these are the three types of questions that I and other doctors are asked quite often. So in this presentation, I'd like to explain what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. Now, I'm not going to deal with spiritual or religious issues. I'm not an imam. I'm not particularly learned in those matters, not so much more than other Muslim people. So obviously there's a spiritual aspect to this. Many of my patients feel bad if they don't fast. They really, really want to fast. And if they can't fast for health reasons, that makes them feel upset. And there's obviously competing thoughts here. There's spiritual health and so on, and what one should be doing from one's religion, and there's the issue of the health of your body. So I'm not going to talk about the spiritual or religious issues. I'm not qualified as an imam or something to say to somebody about those things. I'm just going to talk about the physical health issues, which I am qualified to do. Furthermore, I think that other people have thought about this in much more detail than I have. So I'm not going to be giving my own opinions in general. I'm going to rest a lot on the resource that I've put below. And I think the slides will be available, Chanpreet, for anybody who wants to use that link themselves. This is a link I was introduced to very recently, which is called Ramadan Compendium by the British Islamic Medical Association. So who are they, the British Islamic Medical Association? This is an organization of Muslim healthcare professionals in the United Kingdom. Now, I myself am not a member, so I wasn't involved in creating this resource, but I found it very useful in preparing this talk. I suppose in terms of full disclosure, I could say that I'm not a member myself, but my son-in-law, who's actually joined this, I can see him as an attendee, he is a member. So I'm not, but he is. He was the one who brought my attention to it. And thank you very much, Qasim, for that. So this organization publishes papers and they organize meetings on issues of interest in the intersection between Islam and medicine and healthcare. And this particular compendium that I looked at is extremely useful And what they did was that they reviewed literature. So this isn't just something made up out of people's heads. They reviewed literature which was relevant to that, about fasting, its effect on health, and so on. But there's a caveat, and it's very, very important to read this. In the beginning, in the introduction, they say, this does not replace advice from your healthcare professional. So this isn't to give you individual advice about you yourself, but it's very, very good at giving general advice about different diseases and Ramadan and fasting and so on. So definitely use it, definitely look at it. But if you're still in doubt, talk to your own personal doctor, because it doesn't replace advice from your own healthcare professional. Now, the useful key points I took from it are firstly some things which apply to everybody. You should maintain hydration and healthy eating during Ramadan, and that applies to everybody, well or ill, healthy or not healthy. I try to do it. Sometimes I fail. I eat kind of very high carbohydrate foods, but we should all maintain hydration and healthy eating. Now, regular medications. Continue your regular medications. Anything which you are prescribed regularly, you should still take it. You can take it between iftar and sehri during the period where you can eat, and with water or with food if that's what it's allowed. But it's not a good idea to stop taking regular medications in Ramadan. Now, if there are things you're taking as required, things for pain, for example, you don't have to take them every day you choose. Well, there is some latitude on that. You might choose not to take those, but regular medications you should take. And vaccination, I'm going to specify, because there will be another round of COVID vaccinations soon for some people. Vaccination during the period of the fast does not invalidate the fast. It's quite clear on this point, the compendium. So if you have to go to see your doctor for a vaccine and it's during the hours when you're fasting, you can have the vaccination. It doesn't invalidate the fast. So this BMA compendium divides medical conditions into 3 groups. And they talk about the very high risk group. And in those situations, it says those people really shouldn't fast. It's bad for their health. Then the high risk group, slightly less risk, and they say really on the whole, it's not a good idea to fast, but it's possible, but it's not a good idea. They're in general advising against it. And the low to moderate risk group, that's everybody else, they generally could fast. But again, they say, don't take our word above the word of your own doctor. It's based on medical opinion and also ability of the individual to tolerate the fast. So many people have a different level of tolerating the fast than other people. Some people feel very weak and tired and lethargic. So it is a very individual decision. However, in general, this is a very, very good table that they've provided in this compendium, dividing your conditions into very high risk, and low moderate risk. I recommend it. So you can find it on pages 13 to 15 of the compendium. Now, one thing which is very, very important for patients with lupus is many patients with lupus have more than one condition. They don't just have lupus. So some people, for example, with lupus also have chronic kidney disease. They may be on dialysis, for example. Some people with lupus have antiphospholipid syndrome. So if you've got more than one condition, look up all the conditions you have in the table, and lupus might not be the most relevant. So one thing that I looked up, because I'm very interested in this syndrome, is antiphospholipid syndrome. So if you look up the table, you see that lupus in remission, somebody is doing fine from a lupus, not really having any symptoms. Well, that's low risk, you can fast. But antiphospholipid syndrome, if you've had clots and you're on warfarin, is a high risk one. So if you have antiphospholipid syndrome and you're on warfarin or something with clots, that overrides the lupus and it puts you in a high risk category, which is advised not to fast. So look up all the diseases which apply to you in the table. Now, there's a section on each type of disease in this compendium. So I looked at the section on rheumatological diseases. This was most recently reviewed in 2021, and it's by some doctors from Nottingham. So we look at a number of different papers, and only one of them was actually about lupus. And that paper describes 40 patients, all of whom were quiescent, their disease was well controlled, and 21 fasted and 19 didn't fast. They followed them up for 3 months, and they looked at what happened to their blood tests during Ramadan and after Ramadan, what happened to their disease activity and their quality of life. And the headline figure from this relatively small study is that the people who fasted didn't do any worse. Fasting didn't make their disease activity worse, didn't make their quality of life worse. It was okay. But this is only one study. It's only 40 patients, and they're all well. So there's little evidence. They looked at the evidence. There wasn't very much evidence because it's kind of quite hard to do these sorts of studies. I was actually talking to my son-in-law just yesterday about how one would do research, finding out if fasting was bad for people. It would be quite a tricky study to do. But anyway, there isn't that much evidence. So the recommendations are really based on common sense, and I personally would agree with them. So here are their general recommendations. Lupus is a very, very varied disease. You can't have one rule for every patient. You can't have the same rule for somebody who has maybe a little bit of skin rash occasionally compared to somebody who has severe renal disease or neuropsychiatric disease. So you can't have one rule for everybody. But in general, if a patient has quite severe lupus, so you've got high doses of medications, fasting might lead to disease worsening. These words taken directly from the compendium from this section. So very severe disease, or you need lots of high dose medications to control the disease, fasting is probably a bad idea because it might lead to disease worsening. Kidney patients in particular, very, very important to maintain good fluid intake if you're a kidney patient with kidney failure. So in a hot summer, that might be a problem. So this year, it's a little bit earlier. Hopefully it won't be too hot, but it's something to bear in mind if you're a kidney patient. It might not be a good idea if it leads you not to be hydrated enough. Now, you could try and hydrate yourself during the night, but that's something to bear in mind. And the third thing is, as long as, and again, these words are taken from the document itself, as long as the patients do not suffer from stress, they can fast if the disease remains inactive using mild medications like hydroxychloroquine and low-dose prednisolone. So what's that phrase, as long as the patients do not suffer from stress? So it's slightly ambiguous. What does that stress mean? Does it mean physical stress? Does it mean mental stress? What I take from that is that if the fasting is causing a person so much stress that it makes them have a flare of their disease, that might be a reason not to do it, not to fast. And that's based on the history of the individual patient. So the individual patient should think about what he, or more likely she in lupus, has experienced in fasting before. And if somebody knows that whenever they fast, they have a flare of their lupus, that would be really enough to exempt them under this particular phrase. So some specific recommendations to lupus. I think it's quite clear that if you have severe active lupus, so for example, you've just been in hospital because you had a really bad flare, don't fast. If you have kidney impairment due to lupus, don't fast. It's in one of the red areas in the compendium, the high risk situation. And if you have pulmonary hypertension, not to fast. Why do I say this? Because remember I said they divide them to high risk, high risk, and low moderate risk. And these three things are in the very high risk category according to the compendium. In the high risk, the next category down, it says if you're more than 20 milligrams of prednisolone per day, you probably shouldn't fast. It's not the very high risk category, but it's a high risk category. So these are people with severe disease or disease which is requiring a lot of medications to keep it under control. Now, there's no specific advice on some of the drugs that you or other lupus patients might commonly be on, like mycophenolate, azathioprine, biologics, and so on. So we don't tell you exactly what to do about that. But my interpretation would be that that falls under the category of severe enough to need lots of medications. So the severe enough to need lots of medications is one of those high risk groups. So I personally would interpret that as that those people could have an exemption for fasting. Must stress an individual decision for the patient and their doctor if they can advise. So in summary, whatever your disease, whether it's lupus or any other disease, don't stop any of your regular prescribed medications unless a doctor has told you to do that. Maintain hydration and healthy eating. Consider all your diagnoses, not just the lupus, in making a decision about fasting. And I gave you the example of the antiphospholipid syndrome. If your lupus is very active, or it would be very active unless you take these high dose medications like high doses of steroids, biologics, and so on, the overall advice then would be not to fast if it's very active or requiring high dose medication. But if you're the kind of person who's doing fine, you're on a low dose, maybe 5 milligrams of prednisolone or lower and hydroxychloroquine, and according to this compendium, that should be okay. But base it on your previous experience. It may be that you're one of those people, but you know that whenever you fast personally, you always have a flare. Well, then that's different for you. Then maybe you shouldn't fast. It's very, very personal with some help from your individual doctor. And injections, intramuscular steroids, and vaccinations, even during the fasting period, are okay. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Rahman. That was really interesting and really informative. I've learned quite a lot from that presentation as well. So thank you so much for that. I will now hand over to Debbie, who will host the Q&A part of this session. I mean, please, if anyone's got any questions, please do pop it in the box, the Q&A box below. But I know we have got some questions prior to that were sent in, so I think Debbie might begin with that. So yeah, please feel free to put some questions in. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, thank you for that. So my name's Debbie Kinsey. I'm quite new to Lupus UK. I'm the new Health Information Officer, so you'll see me pop up in Lupus UK things more and more as we go on. So Champreet has put that link in the chat already in case you wanted to look at the compendium before we get the slides out. So feel free to kind of copy that link before the webinar ends. But yeah, you can put questions in the Q&A. If you put them in the Q&A, only the three of us on screen will see your name, so they're relatively anonymous, or you can put things in the chat box if you prefer, in which case everybody will see them. But we'll start off with a few questions that we've had through beforehand, just to give you a chance to get typing. So one person has asked, they said, my doctor advised me not to fast for the previous 2 years as my lupus nephritis is very active, but it's now under control and I'm going to try fasting this year. Is there anything I should monitor when fasting? So if they're newer to fasting, now the disease is under control, what kinds of things should they look out for?
Sure. Okay. So, by the way, but just before I answer this question, there are two other people on this chat who might be able to contribute. There's my wife, and I'd like to wish her a happy Mother's Day. In fact, she's already been very helpful because this video wasn't working, so you wouldn't have been able to see me had it not been for her intervention. Though many might say, incidentally, that would have been a benefit not to be able to see me. So she's on the call, she's a GP, and my son-in-law is also here. And it may be that sometimes they have a better answer than me, and I'd like to invite them to chip in if they think they can answer better. But in terms of the question I've just been asked about lupus nephritis, my query would be, what do we mean by under control? So the thing with lupus nephritis is sometimes people feel good, but their numbers are not necessarily under control. Things like urine protein level. So is the lupus nephritis really under really good control, and is it under control only with high levels of medication? If the latter is true, that yes, it's under control, but only because you're taking a lot of medication, then maybe it's not that great an idea to fast. So you said that your doctor had said not to fast for previous 2 years. So I would go back to that doctor and say, what do you think about me fasting this year? And kidney doctors are always pretty cautious about things. So I would go back to them and just check. So if it's the case that, yes, it's all right, they think it's going to be okay to fast, what should you look out for? So I think that maintaining good hydration is very a good idea. If you notice that you are not passing enough urine, so that's a sign that your kidney isn't working very well. So make a note of, how much urine you would expect to be passing. If you're passing a lot less than that, that could be a problem. You may have a home blood pressure machine. Many patients with kidney disease have a home blood pressure machine. So again, if you notice that your blood pressure is changing a lot, particularly if it's going higher, then that might be a warning sign. And the only other thing I would say is, and this applies to all patients with lupus, lupus is quite an individual disease. And when I'm talking to medical students, I say patients know their own disease. So a patient with lupus usually knows when they're flaring. You say to the patient, is this typical of your lupus flares? And the patient knows. It'll be different for each patient. So if you know what your lupus flares feel like, and if you think you're getting that again, that might be a reason to stop fasting because your lupus is flaring. So look out for your own personal markers. Look out for the amount of urine you're passing. If you happen to have urine sticks for protein, then that's a marker of increased kidney disease activity and blood pressure. So that would be my answer. I don't know if that helps the person who asked the question.
No, that's a very thorough answer. Thank you. I will go to one that we've got through on the chat Q&A. So someone said, in regards to medication, I haven't fasted since Ramadan was during the winter months. And the longer the hours, I was advised to not fast as medication needed to be flushed, and not drinking fluids obviously doesn't help. I'm going to attempt to fast as I'm not on lesser meds, in remission, doing well, and I feel I have enough time between fasting to get my fluids in. Is this wise?
Interesting question again. And again, I come to the point where somebody had advised this patient not to fast. So that was like the previous patient. They had had medical advice, I assume, not to fast. So I would go back to whoever advised that and say, okay, I'm thinking of now fasting. Has the advice changed? Do you think it's okay? So as to how long the days are, I mean, even now, towards the end of Ramadan, we'll all be going from kind of 4 a.m. to 8 p.m., which is kind of quite a long day. It's still quite a long day. It's not like it's December or anything. So I don't know. But your specific question about drinking fluids, it is possible, yes, to have all your medications and all your fluids during the hours between Sari and Iftar. There are relatively few medications that you have to space out exactly 8 hours, for example. There are some medications like pain medications which will lose their effect. So you might have a flare of pain in the middle of the day if you only take them between Sari and Iftar. So I don't know what your specific medications are, and that's very important. You should talk to the doctor who's prescribing your medications about it, because I don't know what you're exactly taking. But my general advice to a patient who I was seeing, who I knew their medications, I would say in general, yes, as long as you take all your medications, you could do it at Sari and Iftar and maintain hydration. It is a little bit tricky, isn't it, to maintain hydration during the hours when you're going to be sleeping. I personally find that difficult, to get up and drink, and then you can't go to sleep again. Then you're trying to go to toilet all night. It's difficult. But then again, one could say Ramadan is not supposed to be easy. We know that it's supposed to be something we do to glorify Allah and to show our commitment to the religion. So it's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to make you ill either, though. So I suppose it's a long answer to a short question. The short answer to the question would be yes, you can take your medications and drink enough fluid during those hours.
Thank you very much. I'll take a question that we had in before the webinar. It's about a specific medication. Someone's about to begin Sublimumab for the first time, but they still want to fast. They've never missed Ramadan. What does Sublimumab mean for them in fasting?
Yeah, so, okay. So Sublimumab is a pretty new drug. We haven't too much experience with it. I'm not quite sure what the frequency of your Sublimumab is. So we often give it monthly. In other words, you could have it before and after Ramadan. But when you start, often it's every 2 weeks, which would mean you would have at least one within Ramadan. Now, again, I don't know your individual circumstances, but the people who I've started on Sublimumab, I would tell them not to fast, because if they're ill enough that I'm starting them on a new biologic, I think they're too ill. Their disease is too active. So Sublimumab itself, being an infusion, I am not sure about specifically. Injections are okay, so I'm assuming infusions are okay, and I don't know if somebody else on the call might have a better answer than me. So actually having the infusion, I think, would be okay. But I think that a person who I had, who was ill enough I was going to start a new drug like that, I would say, no, at this point, you're too ill, you shouldn't do that. I give you an analogy. Sometimes I have young ladies who want to get pregnant. They say, is this a good time to start a family? And if they were just starting Sublimumab, I'd say, no, don't do that right now. Your disease is too active. Wait till we have you under control, and then. So I might say to a patient of mine who'd asked that question, don't do Ramadan this year. Let us get you under control, do it next year. By the way, the compendium also gives some other options, such as delaying your Ramadan till the winter months, so which is okay Islamically if you have a reason to do that, or making it up later, or not doing every consecutive day and making it up later. There are a few options Islamically for people to do. So one option for a patient, and again, I'm not talking to this specific patient because I don't know their specific history, but if you imagine I had a patient, I knew all about them, I would probably be saying to this patient, don't do it now. because you're not well, we're putting on this drug. Maybe later in the year, when you're under control, maybe in the winter months, maybe make it up then. That's what I would say to my patient.
Okay, thank you very much. There is kind of another medication question, which I suppose is more of a religious spiritual question than a medical one, so you may not be able to answer, but it may be in the compendium. Can we still take medication if we're fasting? I was told to only take medication when I open or break my fast.
Okay. So I think, so basically this is what I'd said in the talk between Iftar and Seri. During the hours when you can eat and drink whatever you want, you can take your medication during those hours. So if I were on medication, unfortunately I'm not on medication, that's what I would do. I would take my medications between those hours. The only exception to that rule would be if I were being told you have to take them regularly every 6 hours or every 8 hours or something, otherwise they don't work. So that's what I would do about that. But my understanding, and again, I invite anybody who thinks otherwise to chip in, my understanding is that if you have to take a medication by mouth, because you have to have it during the hours, that would invalidate the fast. Injections are okay, but if you have to take a medication by mouth, then you're not, then that's not a fast day. That's my understanding of it.
Okay, thank you. And this one you did talk about in the fast, but I'll still ask it because that's probably worth emphasizing. I haven't fasted for many years now, as the last time I fasted, I ended up flaring and having to stay in hospital. I really want to try fasting, but I'm a little scared.
Blame you. I really don't blame you for being scared. Nobody wants to end up in hospital, and I don't think, and as I said, I'm steering very clear of trying to talk on religious or Islamic grounds, but my personal belief is that Allah doesn't want people to make themselves ill by fasting. So I don't think it's necessary to do that. You're going to be ill. But the thing is, you don't know, do you? You're not quite sure whether you're going to have a flare or not. And it is really very tricky. So if I were in that situation, I think this is what I would do. I would judge it according to how I am now compared to how I was during that time when I flared. So if I'm really very, very much better now and I haven't had a flare for many years, then I might try it. And it also depends on what the flare was. So if the flare was something, really scary, like neuropsychiatric lupus, like being in hospital, having fits and that sort of thing, something which comes on very, very suddenly and you can't do much about it, then that would maybe make me less likely to fast. But if it was something that it comes on very slowly, like you get more joint pain and more rash and so on, then you would have the option of stopping fasting. You would have tried it and you know you're getting a flare, and before it gets too bad, you can stop fasting and so on. So then you might try it on the basis that if it didn't work out, you'd have time to make a different decision. So base it on how bad was the flare? What sort of flare was it? Was it something very, very sudden or something you would have a chance to do something about it? And how are you now compared to how you were then? That's what I would do if I were in your position. There isn't an easy answer to that. It is very scary to be so ill you have to be admitted to hospital for lupus. It is really very scary about that. Nobody wants to have that again. I can't give you a yes/no answer, but that's how I would reason it myself.
Great, thank you. And it sounds like in the compendium, you're saying that also if people find they then can't fast, there are other options, things they can do to still kind of take part in Ramadan without,
Yeah, so I think this is something which is well understood in Islam, and imams can advise. So the idea of making up the fast. So, for example, one thing which is completely uncontroversial, I think, is if somebody were taken ill for any reason during a time of Ramadan and was unable to fast, they wouldn't have to. And many people then make that up at later periods. Similarly, travel. If you're traveling during Ramadan and far away, then there's an exemption from fasting during that period. And then some people make it up. They might make it up in December or November when the days are very, very short. So it's not the case that you've missed Ramadan, there's nothing you can do about it at all. The compendium is very good on this, and lots of people will be able to advise you. So, if one wants to fast, but maybe not right at this time, there are ways to do that for health reasons, travel reasons, and so on.
So it sounds like it'd be good for people that want to find other options to look in the compendium, maybe talk to their imam, think about what other options
And
might
your
work
doctor,
for them.
yes. I think
And your doctor
there's
as
a
well, yeah.
lot of information in that compendium. It doesn't override what your own doctor would say to you, but you know, there's a lot of information. I'm noticing that none of the people who I invited to chip in if I'd said something wrong has chipped in, which is great. So, so it looks like I'm not doing anything too wrong so far.
That's a good sign. We had another message in the Q&A, but that's more of someone who's a doctor and also has lupus in Nigeria, who interested in specializing in rheumatology and just wanted to chat to you about it. So I think that's probably not something for this webinar, but we can pass on that message to you from that person. So that's all of the questions that we've had through beforehand and during the session. And no one chipped in. Your wife and your son-in-law has not yet chipped in with anything, which is hopefully a good sign. Did you have anything else that you wanted to say? Any final thoughts before we wrap up for today?
Well, I'd like to say Ramadan Mubarak to all my Muslim friends on the chat who are about to start fasting. And no, thanks for giving me an opportunity to do this. It actually led me to do research that I hadn't done before and led me to think about things. It will help me in my own practice, I think. So thank you for that. And no, I don't really have anything else to add.
Great, thank you very much. I'll just pass over to Champreet to wind things up.
No, thank you so much, Professor Rahman. That was really interesting and super informative. I've learned a lot myself. I've jotted down notes while you were going through everything. So thank you so much for that. I think all the information that you've spoke about, we're going to put up on the Lupus UK website. We'll post it to our social media. And if anyone did want to get in touch with Lupus UK, you can email us at headoffice@lupusuk.org.uk. So thank you again, Professor Rahman, and thank you so much, Debbie, as well, for helping out with the Q&A session. That was really cool and really fun to learn so much about this. So yeah, we look forward to welcoming you all back to a future seminar, and thank you so much for this.